Good morning. I'm Savannah Sellers.
And I'm Joe Fryer. We're starting our show early this morning to commemorate a special event. Today marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy, France, which was the largest amphibious assault the world has ever seen.
Codenamed Operation Overlord, it also marked the turning point in World War II and helped pave the way for an Allied victory over Nazi Germany, helping put an end to the largest and deadliest war in history. In his message to the Allied invasion force, Commanding General Dwight Eisenhower wrote, "You are about to embark upon the great crusade towards which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hope and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you."
This morning, President Joe Biden is joining other world leaders to mark the historic event and pay tribute to the thousands who gave their lives fighting for freedom. This anniversary could also be the last major milestone with the invasion's aging heroes in attendance. More analysis. Let's bring in NBC News contributor Jonathan Alter. Jonathan, good to have you with us this morning. So it was 80 years ago today, more than 150,000 Allied troops landed in Nazi-occupied France for the largest amphibious invasion in history. Talk about the significance of this moment today, seeing these veterans who have returned there 80 years later, and talk about the peace that was won because of what happened 80 years ago.
Well, this was one of the most significant days of the entire 20th century, maybe only rivaled by July 20th, 1969, when man landed on the moon. So it wasn't only the turning point in World War II, which was won, of course, with the help of the Russians. It became a symbol of our desire to fight for freedom and to sacrifice for freedom and to stand up to the strong men, the authoritarian dictators who at that time were trying to conquer the world. And it's almost unimaginable because there's so few people for whom this is within living memory. You see, you have to be literally 100 years old and have been on D-Day when you were 20 to be present today. So it's quite different from some of the other anniversaries that have been celebrated of this event. I mean, I remember as a child watching Dwight Eisenhower talk held on the 20th anniversary of D-Day in 1964. And then Ronald Reagan gave an important and moving speech on the 40th anniversary of D-Day in 1984. But at that time, of course, many of the World War II veterans, like my own father, were alive. And now it's passing into history. And it's up to the rest of us to keep the memory alive, not just of their sacrifice, but of what they were fighting for. And this is what's easy to lose sight of. They were fighting against the idea that might makes right, and for democracy and freedom.
Just so incredible, Jonathan. About 150 veterans, actually, who took part in the Battle of Normandy are set to attend the events today. That's who we are seeing, who the camera keeps focusing on in this crowd. For many, as we're discussing right now, this could be the last major milestone they will see. You sort of just set the table for this, but let's talk about their legacy and how it shaped the world we know today, especially in light of what we see happening in multiple places across the world right now.
Well, this is so relevant to what's going on in Ukraine right now. Of course, Ukraine was the site of major battles during World War II, but with different configurations. But, you know, when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, it really wasn't very different from when Adolf Hitler invaded Ukraine. And so the Russians were fighting on the Eastern Front, but on the Western Front, It was the Allies, led by the United States. And this is about standing up to aggression. That's what it was. That's what these men died for. And you have to try to put yourself in their shoes. So on the morning of the invasion, they're not sure what they will face when they get on those transport ships to cross the English Channel. And they land in these, they're called Higgins boats. And they're charging there. And I've been to Normandy. I recommend anybody who's watching, make a trip there. Go to the museums, go to the beaches. It's a wonderful trip to take your children on, because you can use your mind's eye to imagine what was in the minds of these men as when the ships landed just offshore, and they had to go charging into Nazi gunfire. You see the concrete bunkers the Nazis were firing from, and the bravery of charging directly into that fire and watching the man to your left, the man to your right, shot and die on the beach. And you just keep moving until you basically take the beach and then move inward amid immense fighting in the hedgerows, they call them, the shrubbery, tall shrubbery just offshore in Normandy. Intense fighting in the hedgerows, and then moving into France, and then into Belgium, and you had the Battle of the Bulge. A lot of fighting ahead, but this was the beginning of the victory. And I think people understood after we took Normandy, after the Allies took Normandy, that this war would be won, and the world would be safe again from the threat of Nazism.
Jonathan, your words paint a powerful picture. Key words we think of today: freedom and democracy. President Biden is set to speak about those topics today and then again tomorrow. What is it you'll be watching for from the president? What message do you expect him to send?
Well, I think, President Biden is very good at connecting the past to the present. We've seen that in earlier speeches that he's given. And there is a direct line from D-Day to the Western Alliance. And he's meeting with our allies in Europe this week. And we must stand together. This is about collective security. NATO, which former President Trump likes to dump on, came out of World War II. We understood that no nation could do it alone. And we had the nations that believed in freedom had to band together. And there were Canadian assaults on those beaches too, that included some of the Free French, and soldiers of other nations took part in D-Day. And that was an indication that we need to join together, that none of this is possible without working together. And I think that's the kind of note that President Biden will strike today.
Jonathan Alter, thank you so much for joining us and kicking us off the history lesson and the great words about our veterans. We so appreciate you joining us this morning. For more on this historic anniversary, we are joined by NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. She is in Paris. Kelly, good morning. So President Biden arrived in Normandy just from Paris this morning. Tell us more about his agenda. We just heard from Jonathan some of what he expects to hear from him. Tell us what he'll be doing today.
Part of what was so notable is the personal moments that the president and first lady had with the American World War II veterans who are here. And there are about 200 of them who have been able to make the trip. And the president met them, took photos with them. You could see conversations with them, connecting in a very personal way. That's certainly a big part of why an event like this is so powerful, because it does connect not only the leadership of the nations that were involved, but it also gets right back to the individual men who were a part of the invasion, who risked their lives, whose lives were probably forever changed by the experiences, and then are still strong enough 80 years later to make the trip to be here to mark this moment. So that is certainly a part of what was certainly a highlight for the White House. In addition, the president will be among those making remarks, and we expect that he will talk about these themes that you heard Jonathan speak of, where there is a relevance today to the importance of the history that was decided 80 years ago, and how the alliances that were a part of that war and then creating the new world order that followed, where there would be secure borders, where friendly nations would not change those borders by force, all of the kinds of things that provided decades of relative peace, certainly in Europe and in many places around the world, that kind of world order is something that takes care and tending, and democracy is something that is vulnerable at different times. We certainly see that in the relevance of some of the themes in the election back home. There are certainly issues when you look at the war in Ukraine and the war with Israel in Gaza. So all of that ties back to what D-Day means and why so many people and so many nations come back and want to mark this day because of its significance. And so you'll hear all of that from the president as he is here in France for an extended visit. In addition to the Normandy commemorations today, the president will go back to Normandy on Friday, separate from this sort of global commemoration, and deliver a specific address to the American people from a point where American Rangers had played out a particularly brave battle 80 years ago. And he will speak to those themes and the democracy and so forth on Friday. So really bringing those issues throughout this trip. And then this is also a state visit for the president in France, which is why I'm in Paris. That part of those events will unfold here in a couple of days, where Emmanuel Macron will host the president in the highest diplomatic forum, which is another sign of the deep and enduring bond. The U.S. and France, the oldest alliance for the United States, is the partnership with France, and that will play out here as well. Savannah, Joe?
We expect this program to get underway momentarily. Kelly, as you've noted here, the president's main priority today is to pay tribute to those amazing veterans who are on stage right now, while also delivering that message about freedom, about democracy, recognizing that right now back here in America there are competing visions about the U.S.'s role in the world. How does he plan to address those without making it feel too political?
In many ways, he can talk about the underpinnings of what happened 80 years ago, how it created organized institutions and partnerships that have endured through these years. And by simply talking about that historical storyline and citing its relevance today, people can hear it as a contemporary message as well. He doesn't need to bring in the politics of the moment. Implicit in what he will say is that these alliances matter. Institutions like NATO matter. Institutions like the United Nations, which formed these alliances after World War II, that those are persistent because there is a need. He will also meet with President Zelensky of Ukraine while in Normandy, and that is a very relevant contemporary touchstone for what's at stake. On the continent of Europe, aggression by Russia and a democratic state is fighting for its survival. So there are plenty of ways where history can tell a modern-day story, and President Biden will certainly try to tap into that. And to remind people that these values, when you have decades of relative peace and security, that perhaps people forget what was at stake. We are now generations away from World War II. And so the president will try to, with these real people who have come a long distance, traveling at their advanced age, to be here again, a very powerful symbol of what he is going to lay out. So it is something where the viewer, the listener, will interpret it, and certainly things like the president's campaign can reflect on it later. Other political actors in the national conversation can. But here it will be focused on a commander-in-chief moment for President Biden and a world leader moment. The president is particularly focused on the fact that the United States is an indispensable nation, an essential nation when these things come together. And you certainly see that in France, where there's this enduring gratitude for what the United States did to liberate France and to fight the Nazis back in World War II, along with the other powers of the alliance. So the president will speak of history, but there will be a modern message in it for sure. Joe?
Kelly, you touched on the time that the president has spent with some of these veterans. Of course, this day is so much about freedom and about democracy, but really so much about celebrating these heroes who have made this trip, who are still with us. We know they are being well taken care of. There's nurses, they have health care available to make this journey for them a safe one and hopefully an enjoyable one. Tell us a little bit more about the time that the president will be spending with these veterans who made the trip.
Well, certainly there are no more important dignitaries for this commemoration than the veterans themselves. In a world gathering like this, there is the King of England, the Prince of Wales, and there are certainly presidents and prime ministers and leaders from about 24 countries. But everyone seems focused on the veterans themselves, in part because it is so striking to see the young men of generations ago who are now older men. There's a fitness to them that they are well enough to be here, men and women, mostly men, of course, from the various branches. And there is a lot of care, a lot of respect, and there is personal time that the president has spent. Even when we were traveling to France, flying commercially, separate from the president, there were veterans on our flight, and there were all of those acknowledgments. Everyone boarding the flight, there was an honor guard as they boarded. There was applause for these veterans. It was remarkable to me. It was almost hard to believe that the veteran who was sitting across from me could in fact be from World War II. He did not look like he was old enough to have done that. And so there was a lot of people talking to them, hearing their stories. Many of them carry a photo of themselves taken in uniform at the time of their service in World War II. And it's just striking. They obviously have a remarkable life force to live into their 90s, some over 100. There was sad news that one of the veterans traveling here, who was expected to get acknowledgement today, passed away in the journey, passed away in Germany, 102 years old, on his way to France. So they are fragile. And all of the big commemorations of past U.S. presidents, going back to, Reagan and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, who have come for these celebrations in the past, Barack Obama, that there were always groups of veterans, and that group is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And those who are here and are being greeted and are being celebrated certainly are a living reminder of what happened, and one that is a very precious symbol because of the march of time and all that they endured. So very much so, different than many kinds of presidential level events. These veterans are really the focus of what's happening here. And certainly stirring images, beautiful music, sweeping, glorious vistas at Normandy. What a beautiful place for something that was so difficult, so ugly in its moment, and yet so enduring in its importance. So all of that is what is being marked and noted and celebrated today. And this is a piece of history that's being written right now. One more chapter in the story of Normandy. Savannah, Joe?
The history continues. Kelly, will ask you to stand by. Jonathan Alter, I wanted to bring you back in here. We've been on the air for nearly 20 minutes now, looking at the faces of these veterans. As Kelly mentioned, some are in their hundreds, the rest in their upper 90s. We think of the lives they've lived, the heroics of that day, and how they've been telling this story for the last 80 years. What goes through your mind, Jonathan, when you see these faces and think of what these men have gone through?
Well, I have nothing but respect and reverence for what they did. They are, the youngest of them is 98. You had to be 18 to be in the armed forces. And the vast bulk of them are at least 100 years old. And it's a sign that through modern health, we've really been able to prolong life. And it's just so heartwarming to me that they can still bear witness. 10 years from now, there won't be anybody. And so the living connection to the past, so that those of us who are younger can have what's called a usable past, a way of connecting not just to their individual sacrifice, but to the larger ideas they were fighting. America was founded on an idea. This is what people too often don't really understand. And these men, even though they would, might say that they were fighting for their buddies, which is what my father and most other veterans would say if you ask them. They're fighting for their friends, many of whom died. They also all know that they were fighting for this larger idea. And when you think about that for a minute, that people would lay down their lives for an idea, it should make all of us take that idea of freedom and democracy and standing up to aggression and maintaining international alliances and having decent leadership, respects human beings. These are important ideas, and they're not very common in human history, which is more a history of might makes right than what Lincoln said, which is right makes might. And so these men understood that right makes might. And when a democracy is aroused, it can defend itself with a fierceness and bravery that can beat the most dictatorial of regimes. And I do think that thinking about a day like this reminds us not just of their sacrifice, but of their understanding of what is called the American idea.
Jonathan, you walked us through a little bit ago when we were talking just 15 minutes ago or so, really kind of giving us some imagery of the day and what these men went through on that beach, men and women, I should say. But seeing people, their friends, their fellow servicemen die right next to them, what do you think is going through their minds right now, being back there 80 years later? Many of them have probably made this journey before, taken this trip, been here for other anniversaries, but 80 years later, what do you think it's like to be at the site of this?
Well, my guess is that they will, after this ceremony, they will visit the very large cemetery nearby. You might remember it from the film Saving Private Ryan, which is the best film on D-Day. And they will, as my father did, they will weep, some of them, when they go and see the gravestones of their friends. It's 80 years, but it's still hard. So I just have such respect for, first of all, their ability to make this trip, to go across the ocean when they're 100 years old. That gives you some indication of their sense of this moment.
Jonathan, we'll ask you to stand by for a moment. We want to bring in NBC News international correspondent Kelly Kobiea, who's also in Normandy, France. Kelly, we have listened to you share some extraordinary stories. You've had the honor of speaking with some of these veterans. What stands out in your mind, and what is going to be happening at the cemetery behind you as we mark this day?
Yeah, good morning to you, Joe and Savannah. Well, a couple of things. We've spoken to quite a few veterans over the past couple of days about their experiences here 80 years ago today. And what really struck me is that the memories are so clear. One of the veterans we spoke to said, yes, it was 80 years ago, but sometimes 80 years ago feels like yesterday. That something will happen and it will spark a memory and it will all come flooding back for them. And, some of the veterans who are here this year, they're here for the very first time. We spent some time with a man named Ben Miller, and he was one of the very few, only a few thousand, who landed here in Normandy on a glider. And these gliders were known as flying coffins at the time because they were so incredibly dangerous. They were unarmored and unarmed, and pilots did the best they could to actually land them safely, and many of these gliders did not land safely. They crashed. And we talked to Ben about his experience on that glider, being a 19-year-old young man, a medic. He said they weren't very well trained. They didn't really know what they were doing. They were doing their best to plug bullet holes and keep some of the paratroopers on the ground alive. And he talked about that day and landing in the paraglider. He said both of the wings broke off when they landed, and thankfully he and the rest of the medics got out alive. They said there was crossfire when they managed to climb out of the glider and were able to hide themselves until it was safe enough to come back up and start to look for some of these injured paratroopers and help them. Just these incredibly vivid memories of what these men went through 80 years ago today. Another man, a bomber pilot named Floyd Blair, said that he remembers his orders from that morning. He remembers being told, look, if you get into a dogfight up in the air over the beaches of Normandy and you run out of ammunition, you stay there. You don't leave. You ram them. You ram the German pilots, the Luftwaffe. He said when they got up in the air that day, the Luftwaffe wasn't there. And he ended up being over the skies here in Normandy, over the beaches here in Normandy, and watching what was happening down below. And he said he remembers so clearly that the water was changing color, and he didn't quite make the connection when he was in the sky. But later, as he reflected on it, he realized that that was the blood of fellow soldiers, the people who weren't making it to shore, the many thousands who died that day trying to reach land and trying to help free this part of France and then go on to help liberate Europe. So it's these kinds of images, very vivid images of what it was like that day. And these veterans are coming back, not just to remember, certainly not to be honored. These men are incredibly humble and don't see themselves as heroes. They're coming back to sort of relive those moments and also pay respects to the men and women who didn't come back. This cemetery behind me, you see the headstones of some 9,000 fallen soldiers who weren't able to make it home. They were all very young, in their teens and early 20s. And that bomber pilot told me, and told pretty much everyone who would listen when he was here, that it was the people on the ground who were the brave ones. He said, I don't know how they managed to get up the courage to get on those beaches that day. Going forward, as we look at this anniversary, we will hear from President Biden, of course. We will see a ceremony from the French president, President Macron, awarding some of these veterans the highest honor in France, the French Legion of Honor. We will hear taps. We will hear readings of poems. And we will see a flyover of C-130s, as well as a flyover of F-35s in the missing man formation. So about a half-an-hour ceremony, a very somber ceremony. We've already seen a lot of the vets that we met being taken up to the stage area, each one very slowly being brought up to the stage. The crowds, I don't know if you can see much behind me, but there's a long line of crowds, members of the public who have come here, and they applauded when each one of those veterans was brought up to the stage. Just really touching moments. These men, the average age is 100. Most of them are either in their late 90s or over 100. This will be likely the last time they're able to come here, share those memories with other vets, a very, very small group, and be honored and say goodbye to the other soldiers who never made it home. Savannah, Joe.
Absolutely. Kelly, thank you so much for sharing those stories that you've heard from veterans over the last few days. It's so neat to hear those. We do expect this to get underway here in a few minutes as we near the top of the hour, 7 a.m. on the East Coast, nearly 1 p.m. in Normandy, France. Kelly, many people, probably most people listening, watching right now, might not get the chance to make the trip to Normandy, France. It's this place where, we're seeing this beautiful commemoration. There is that cemetery behind you, this memorial to these heroes, but also a place where something, as we've been describing in detail this morning, something obviously horrible happened at the same place in terms of so many of these servicemen dying. What is it like to be there on the ground? Just tell us a little bit about Normandy and getting to be there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This is hallowed ground, of course. One of the veterans told me it's a beautiful place, but it's also a very sad place for the reasons that I just described. When those veterans look at these crosses and Stars of David behind me, they think of their friends who they lost 80 years ago. Interestingly, when you leave this cemetery, most days it's open to the public and you see huge crowds behind me. People are able to walk through, take in the atmosphere, pay their respects, move on to the beaches and get an idea of what it must have been like on that day. But when you leave the cemetery, especially this time of year, the towns around this area are filled with World War II vehicles, with people in World War II garb, with American flags, big welcome signs, welcome liberators signs everywhere. And interestingly, especially if you're with one of these veterans, people are so eager to approach you, to approach them. They want to know their stories. They want to take their pictures. They really want to tell their stories and their memories from their families, perhaps, of what life was like when this part of the country was occupied by the Nazis and what it was like when it was liberated by the Americans. One woman, 98 years old, who lived through, obviously, the occupation and the liberation, said there's a very special bond between the people in this area and Americans. And I think if you visit here, even in a different time of year, you get that sense as well. It's not just during the D-Day commemoration week when you feel that big warm welcome. As an American tourist coming to this part of France, you feel the embrace. People are very, very welcoming and very appreciative and grateful for what the Americans did 80 years ago today. So it's an interesting part of France. It's a part of France that is never forgotten. Certainly, I'm sure you could say that about all of this country, but here in particular, it's a place that is never forgotten. That day is never forgotten. Those stories, they tell them to their kids and their grandkids. You see little kids. Yesterday we saw, day before, we saw a very young kid walking up to one of our veterans and saluting, brings tears to my eyes to think of it, saluting and saying, "Thank you for your service, sir." And he was probably 7, 8 years old. And that's not unusual. That's something that happened last year when we were here. You saw a lot of that last year, but it really is very touching when you see the way that Americans are welcomed here, and in particular, these surviving vets are welcomed.
Kelly, it's certainly fair to say that when you are in your hundreds, traveling from America to France is not an easy task, and yet 150 of these veterans have made the decision to do this. When you speak with them, why was it so important for them to be there on this day?
Yeah, and a couple of them have waited all these 80 years to come, and some of those, the reasons are family reasons, they're financial reasons. In some cases, they just didn't know that there was a way for them to come back and come back safely. As you said, much older now, and it's not easy to make a 8 to 10 hour cross-Atlantic flight here to Normandy, and then once you get here, the days are long. And I think for some of them, it was just hard to
to come back. It was hard to face the memories. One of the veterans we spoke to, Dick Rung, who's been talking about his experiences over the past several years. He actually goes to schools and talks about his experiences here in Normandy. He was on one of the landing crafts on D-Day, and his boat, he said, was trying to reach shore to bring a couple of tanks to shore, and they kept having to go back out to sea and find another spot because the land was so hot. He said there was so much incoming fire from the Germans that they struggled to find a place to actually land. And he said that his brother was also serving here in France at the time, and his brother didn't talk about his experiences, and he wanted to talk to his brother about what they both went through, both very different experiences during World War II, and he just didn't want to. And I think that is the case for some of these men. They simply, the memories are really, really difficult for them. Even, you know, today, 80 years later, again, one of the men I talked to, Floyd Blair, the bomber pilot, it brought tears to his eyes. He got very emotional when he thought about flying above and seeing the water below and seeing thinking about all of the people who had died. So I think it's a really, really tough decision for them to make in the first place, to come here. It's a very brave decision for them to make, to come here, to face those memories, which are sometimes incredibly difficult to face, to think about the people who were standing and fighting alongside them who weren't able to come home. And I think some of them have told me that they do it because they're older now. It's a last chance. It's, you know, a couple of the guys said that, who had been here before, said they're not coming back again. This is it for them. They're worried now a little bit about their health. They've come here, they've seen what they need to see, they've dealt with the memories that they wanted to deal with, and now they're ready to put this to bed a little bit. I have to say that the vets we have been following come with this incredible organization called the Best Defense Foundation, and they really do go above and beyond to take care of these guys. They make sure that they're brought over here safely. Each man has a caregiver with him who spends all of their time with them, makes sure that he is healthy. They have a medical staff of 15, I think, to make sure all of the guys are well cared for, and if they're not feeling well, if they're not feeling up for one of these events, then they'll keep them back at the hotels. You know, it's an intense schedule. As I said, when these guys come here, they are the superstars, and there are lunches, there are commemorative events, there are trips to beaches, there are trips to battlefields. Everybody wants their time. So, you know, by the afternoon, they really do try to guard them a little bit, bring them back to their hotels, give them time to reflect on what they've seen and what they've experienced. But yeah, you know, I think for some of them, it's a difficult decision to make. Some of them deal with it much better. Others, it's a difficult decision to make, to come here and face those memories.
Kelly, it's wonderful to hear them described as superstars, just as they should be. For viewers who are joining us, we are just past the top of the hour now, just past 7 a.m. on the East Coast, 1 p.m. in Normandy, France. We came on the air early this morning as we are doing special coverage of the 80th anniversary of D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy, France. This morning, we are going to see a whole program. We will play that out for you. President Biden is there. He will be speaking shortly. Just on the right side of your screen there, you can see Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who has made the trip as well. We will also hear from the French president as we commemorate this, as about 150 veterans have made the trip. For many of them, as we just heard from Kelly Kobaye, if you've been with us, it may be the last time that they make this trip to Normandy, somewhere where they lost many of their friends, their fellow servicemen, and where they fought, of course, to eventually go on to liberate Europe. Kelly, apologies if we interrupt you as you answer this question in case the program does get underway, but walk us through a little bit of the TikTok this morning and what we are going to see as these celebrations, as this commemoration happens in Normandy, France today.
Yeah, so we'll see the arrival of the dignitaries first. We'll then see a flyover of C-130 transport planes, and then we'll start in the commemoration phase of this ceremony. We'll hear from President Biden, who is expected to talk about the victory of democracy over dictators, the symbolism of this moment 80 years later. As we stand in Europe with a war on Europe's eastern flank, the idea that so much was sacrificed here in Normandy and across Europe 80 years ago in the effort to defeat Hitler and Nazi Germany, and we will also, interestingly, see among those dignitaries the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, who was an invited guest here today. That's a kind of that gives you an idea of what we'll hear from the president. And we will also see President Macron of France awarding those veterans with the French Legion of Honor. There will be a reading from a military poem called The Watch, which is about a sailor on watch day and night. And we will also hear taps and then a flyover of F-35s. So, excuse me, in a lot of ways, a very symbolic ceremony. And at the center of it, of course, are these incredible World War II veterans. You can see people are still arriving here behind me. There are huge crowds all the way lined up behind the stage waiting to hear this ceremony as it gets ready to start. And this is not the only ceremony. There will also be an international commemoration on Omaha Beach and a couple of other commemorations throughout the day today. You know, from what we understand from our local producer here in France, this ground, this soil that we're standing on right now, this is actually American soil. This was a battlefield 80 years ago. It was a place where many, many men died. And after the war, the land was given by the French government to the American government so that the U.S. could bury their dead. And it is still American soil today. It's the reason that President Biden will be greeting President Macron and not the other way around, because where we're standing is hallowed ground for Americans. Once the ceremony here is over, that's pretty much it. Again, last year it was a little bit different. It wasn't as big of an anniversary. People were allowed to mill about afterwards. They were allowed to look at some of the grave sites here. The ceremony was cemetery was open to the public. I'm not sure if that's actually going to happen this year, but that gives you an idea of what we'll see during the ceremony.
Kelly, just the stories that the veterans have shared with you that you are now sharing with us, we are so incredibly grateful for those. Jonathan Alter, I want to bring you in here because in addition to the bravery of the veterans on stage there, on a day like today, I think often of leadership and how well known it was that General Eisenhower would not take credit for the successes of D-Day, but history tells us he was more than willing to take the blame if it had been a failure. It really was a different generation of leadership, wasn't it?
It was, but we do have echoes of that leadership in our politics today. They're just a little bit hard to find. So the loud voices of the public debate often drown out those who do appreciate accountability, responsibility, connection to the past. And I think that's what President Biden will talk about today, that keeping that connection to that earlier era of leadership. Now, they weren't perfect. You know, I wrote a book about Franklin Roosevelt. He wasn't perfect, but they did have a sense of the larger purpose. And I recommend to everyone that they read Dwight Eisenhower's letter that he did not issue. It was a letter that he prepared before D-Day if the invasion had failed. And in that letter, which he would have issued publicly, he takes full responsibility for the defeat. Now, fortunately, he never had to send that letter, make that statement. But I do think it lives on as a, an important reminder that we do need to take responsibility and be accountable for whatever they decide.
Jonathan, it does sound like the program might be getting underway. We see Secretary Austin standing on his feet. Once the official party is entered, we do expect a C-130 flyover, which will begin the moments and the festivities we will see here. President Emmanuel Macron will be speaking. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will be speaking, along with President Biden. There will be a 21-gun salute, and then it will conclude with an F-35 flyover, including that missing man formation that Kelly Cobiella was describing moments ago. Let's take a moment and listen in.
June 6, 1944, D-Day. France has been occupied by Nazi Germany for almost 4 years. Some countries have suffered under their sinister yoke even longer. Unfathomable crimes were committed against whole peoples. But the burdens of nations can only be lifted by the efforts of individuals. Early that morning, Lieutenant John Spaulding, a 29-year-old sports writer from Owensboro, Kentucky, assisted by 25-year-old Sergeant Philip Strachik, a truck driver from New Jersey, commanded 32 men in E Company, 16th Infantry, as part of the first wave onto Omaha Beach, where more than 2,400 men would be killed or wounded that same day. Navigating rough waters, they took on machine gun, mortar, and artillery fire, but were able to make it out of the water and across the beach, bypassing a German machine gun emplacement 100 yards to their left that was mercilessly cutting down men from F Company. Their radio not working and cut off from the rest of E Company, Lieutenant Spaulding and Sergeant Strachik led their platoon to the base of the bluff behind the cover of a demolished building. Pinned down by gunners from above, they took stock of their situation. "We could still see no one to the right," Lieutenant Spaulding said. "We didn't know what had become of the rest of E Company. Back in the water, boats were in flame. I saw a tank ashore knocked out. After a couple of looks back, we decided we wouldn't look back anymore." Taking relentless fire from above, avoiding landmines underfoot, Lieutenant Spaulding, Sergeant Strachik, and their men pushed upward. They reached the top and overran the machine gun nest, opening a path for the men below to follow. Fighting onward, They continued along the bluff, attacking enemy fortifications from the rear, clearing trenches and pillboxes, and taking prisoners. Lieutenant Spaulding, Sergeant Stretchick, and the rest of their platoon secured a pathway for the thousands of men bottled up on the beach behind them. The advance could now continue. But military prowess and tactical skill like this were only part of what propelled America's sons to the top of that bluff and beyond. There was something more. In the words of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, they had embarked on a great crusade, and the hope and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere marched with them. That great crusade would eventually free the tyrannized peoples of Europe and help save the world as we know it. And it all began right here on June 6th, 1944.
Distinguished guests, please rise, if you are able, for the arrival of the official party.
Chers invités, veuillez vous lever si vous le pouvez pour l'arrivée de la délégation officielle.
Distinguished guests, the President of the United States of America and Dr. Biden, accompanied by the President of the French Republic, Mrs. Macron.
Chers invités, le Président des États-Unis d'Amérique et la Dr. Biden, accompagnés du Président de la République française et de Madame Macron.
Distinguished guests, please remain standing for the national anthem of the French Republic, followed by the national anthem of the United States of America.
Chers invités, veuillez rester debout pour l'hymne national de la République française, suivi de l'hymne national des États-Unis d'Amérique.
Distinguished guests, please remain standing for the invocation delivered by Chaplain Karen Meeker.
Chers invités, veuillez rester debout pour l'invocation prononcée par l'aumônière Karen Meeker.
Let us bow our heads in humble reverence and solemn remembrance. Let us pray. God, when you needed someone to defend freedom, you made a soldier. When you needed someone to fight tyranny, you created a Marine. When you needed someone to protect the skies, you made an airman. When you needed someone to guard the seas, you made the sailor. And to patrol the shores, the Coast Guard. When you needed to send someone brave and true, it has always been and always will be the men and women of the armed forces. When the world needed heroes, you called the greatest generation to courage, and their answer still echoes in the soul of the nation. Shine your eternal light upon those whose gravestones encircle us as silent sentinels, reminding us of the price of liberty. Comfort with your abiding presence those who mourn empty tables and empty chairs, of those who gave their best hopes for our brighter tomorrows. Be our witness, O God, as we stand on this hallowed ground, consecrated in blood, that we will be devoted to the preservation of peace with the same determination as these here who fought fourscore years ago. As storm clouds gather on the horizon once again, rise up, O God, the next greatest generation, to meet every challenge with an unbreakable resolve to do what is right and good in your sight, not counting the cost, but weighing the unfinished work of freedom, a vision where all people can pursue the life to which you have created them. May it be so, I pray, in your holy name. Amen and amen.
Distinguished guests, please take your seats.
Chers invités, veuillez prendre place.
Please welcome the Secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission, Charles K. DeJude.
Veuillez accueillir le secrétaire de la Commission américaine des monuments de guerre, Charles K. DeJude.
Thank you. President and First Lady Biden, President and Madame Macron, ladies and gentlemen, Welcome to the American Battle Monuments Commission, Normandy American Cemetery. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue. D-Day is the hinge of history. It is here we reflect the very best of America's values. When America sends its young, its brave, its finest, we do not send them to fight for a king or a crown. We do not fight for a sect or a denomination. We do not fight for a motherland or a fatherland. No, and we never, ever fight for conquest or plunder or enslavement of another people. When America is at its best, America sends its young, its brave, its finest to fight for simple, humble values. The values of freedom, liberty, and democracy. And when the job is done, when the mission is accomplished, when the tyrant is taken down and democracy is stood up, America does something unique in the history of mankind. We go home. All that America asks for in return for the sacrifice of our young, our brave, and our finest are a few small plots of land to bury our dead. All of you are seated here in one of those small plots of land. That is why this date, June 6th, this place, Normandy, and this ceremony here is so important. It is a reminder to all of us of the true cost of war and the real price of freedom. It is a price that we paid on D-Day 80 years ago. It is a price that we remind all authoritarian dictators today that if necessary, we will pay that price again to ensure the success of freedom. And that is ultimately why France knows, the United States knows, and we know. La France connaît, et les États-Unis connaissent, et nous connaissons that the world's most powerful weapon system is not a T-72 manned by mercenaries. It is not a Fujian aircraft carrier patrolling artificial islands. It is not a suicide terrorist killing and slaughtering innocents. No. The world's most powerful weapon system was, is, and shall forever be a free people willing to fight for freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here. Thank you for remembering here. Thank you for renewing your faith in freedom. Je vous dis merci beaucoup. May God bless each and every one of you, France and the United States of America.
Distinguished guests, the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron.
Chers invités, le Président de la République française, Emmanuel Macron.
Monsieur le Président des États-Unis, cher Joe Biden, Madame la Première Dame, Dr. Jill Biden, Mesdames et Messieurs, en vos grades et qualités, Messieurs les combattants du débarquement, chers vétérans, Mesdames et Messieurs, ces humbles tombes blanches qui sont juste là, à portée de main derrière vous, sont un des lieux les plus émouvants de France. On y sent vibrer l'histoire, l'héroïsme des morts et celui des vivants. On y lit la grandeur d'un peuple prêt à mourir sur un sol qui n'est pas le sien, pour une cause qui est la sienne. Il est un sanctuaire où se transmet comme un flambeau la mémoire inlassable du jour J. Car ici est le lien séculaire entre nos deux nations, nos deux républiques qui se renouvellent et s'affirment. Un lien de sang versé pour la liberté. Ce lieu comme cette cérémonie disent notre dette à l'égard de ceux qui sont tombés, comme de ceux qui ont survécu. Et vous voilà, aujourd'hui, à nos côtés. À l'été 1944, vous aviez 20 ans à peine, parfois moins. Vous aviez une famille, des amis, une fiancée, une femme, parfois des enfants. Vous aviez des rêves, des projets, un avenir. Et vous avez tout quitté. Franchi l'océan et débarqué sur les côtes de France il y a 8 décennies de cela. Vous avez tout quitté et pris tous les risques pour notre indépendance, pour notre liberté. Cela, nous ne l'oublions pas. Merci. Vous êtes venu ici et vous avez rejoint notre guerre pour y faire basculer l'histoire. Oui. Vous êtes venu ici, Mr. Hilbert Margol, débarqué à Marseille en janvier 1945, remontant l'Europe de la Provence à la Pologne, jusqu'à ce jour dramatique où, avec votre frère jumeau Howard, vous avez découvert les charniers de Dachau. Vous êtes venu ici, Mr. John Wardle, fantassin auquel votre courage a valu une blessure à Hürtgenwald, en Allemagne, en pleine bataille. Vous êtes venu ici, Mr. Robert Pedigo.
You are watching a ceremony commemorating the 80th anniversary of D-Day, a powerful moment that includes the French President Emmanuel Macron, who's speaking now. President Joe Biden will be speaking after him. Jonathan Alter, NBC News contributor, has been watching everything with us this morning. Jonathan, what's going through your mind as this commemoration now is underway?
Well, you know, I keep harking back to this very fine speech that we just heard before President Macron from the head of the Battlefield Commission. And he used one sentence that, for me, sums it all up. We go home. What he meant was when the Allies go to liberate a country and protect that country from the forces of despotism and authoritarianism, we don't stay. You know, we've made mistakes in our foreign policy, but we go home. We are not there to conquer another land and make it part of the United States. We were not there in 1944 to make France our own. We were there to liberate France. And there's a huge difference. And that points to the difference that he pointed to between us and Russia. Putin wants to make Ukraine part of Russia. We did not want to make France part of the United States. And he also pointed out, I thought, quite brilliantly, that a suicide bomber or a Russian tank, or you mentioned Chinese weapons patrolling islands in the South China Sea. These weapons are nothing compared to people fighting for freedom. And that really is one of the, the real lessons of D-Day, is that when aroused, democracies can be extraordinarily impressive fighting forces and overcome very, very stiff opposition from enemy forces. So, and I also think that the other thing that strikes me about President Macron speaking now is the length of the Franco-American relationship. Remember that Lafayette came over when we were fighting for freedom initially, and then we returned the favor many generations later. This seals that.
Let's listen in now a little bit more to the French president as he speaks English.
Vous êtes venu ici. Alors vous voilà à jamais chez vous.
And
sur le
Jonathan,
sol
he's
de
actually
France.
speaking French once again. We just want to make sure we continue to bring our viewers information here. Jonathan, you just very smartly pointed out those comments from the Secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission that we heard about this morning. Just prior to that, we heard the French national anthem followed by the U.S. national anthem. Of course, we saw our president walk in just alongside the French president who's speaking now. Talk about the relationship between these two countries that was formed and forever forged on this day, on D-Day.
Yeah, so the relationship really goes back to the founding of our republic when we were fighting for our independence from Great Britain, and the French helped us. General Lafayette helped us get our freedom initially. And in all the years after that, we continued, for the most part, to have good relations with France. We fought on France's side in World War I. And then after Hitler conquered France in 1940, we organized to liberate France. And I think sometimes, because of various cultural differences, people don't appreciate just how close this Franco-American relationship has been over the years.
Jonathan, thank you again for your expertise. Let's listen in here for a moment.
Va maintenant présenter l'Ordre national de la Légion d'honneur. Créée en 1802 par Napoléon Bonaparte, la Légion d'honneur est la plus haute décoration française et récompense les services éminents rendus à la République française. Cette distinction décernée à ces vétérans américains reconnaît leur service et leur participation à la libération.
If you've been watching here in the audience, you may have caught glimpses of Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, and so many others who are there to commemorate this moment. Let's listen in here as we believe the French Legion is about to be given by French President Macron.
Monsieur Hilbert Margol, au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. Monsieur John Wardle, au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur.
Thank you very much.
wants to say it. He wants to stand. Monsieur Robert Pelligot, au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. Monsieur Calvin China, au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. Monsieur Edward Berthold, au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. Monsieur Dominique Critelli, au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. Monsieur Bill Casassa, Au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. Monsieur Victor Channing, au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. Monsieur Raymond Landsberg, au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. Monsieur Richard Stewart, au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. Monsieur John Kenyon, au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur.
Distinguished guests, please welcome the Honorable Lloyd J. Austin III, Secretary of Defense of the United States of America.
Chers invités, veuillez accueillir l'honorable Lloyd J. Austin, troisième du nom, secrétaire à la Défense des États-Unis d'Amérique.
President Biden, Dr. Biden, President Macron, Mrs. Macron, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and above all, the veterans of World War II. I am honored to stand again at this hallowed place. We bow our heads to remember the more than 9,000 U.S. and Allied soldiers killed or wounded on D-Day by Hitler's forces. On behalf of the United States Department of Defense, I am here to give thanks, inadequate as that word may be. 80 years later, we thank the young Americans who took the beaches, who helped liberate France, and who helped free this continent from Nazi tyranny. We thank every Allied warrior who fought for freedom on June 6, 1944. And we thank the American and Allied veterans who have rallied once more on the shores of Normandy. Victors of D-Day, we are humbled by your presence. The young Americans who fought through the clamor and the chaos on D-Day have grown old or left us. And whenever a veteran of D-Day is gathered to his maker, in the fullness of time, after a long life lived in freedom, he wins a final victory over Hitler. You helped defeat what Churchill called a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark, lamentable catalog of human crime. And you laid the foundation for a more just, free, and decent world. Together with our allies, we built peace out of war, a hard-headed peace, a peace renewed by constant commitment, a peace forged by the generation that won the bloodiest war in human history. And so our gratitude must never fade. Our memories must never dim, and our resolve must never fail. We still seek a world where aggression is a sin, and where human rights are sacred, and where all people can live in freedom. And so we must rally again to defend the open, post-war world of rules, rights, and responsibilities. Those rules protect us. Those rights define us. And those responsibilities summon us once more. At this hinge in history, we must again stand firm against aggression and tyranny. And as I said here last year, if the troops of the world's democracies could risk their lives for freedom then, surely the citizens of the world's democracy can risk our comfort for freedom now. So let us again uphold the spirit of D-Day. Let us again defend the principles that the Allied armies carried. And let us again thank the heroes of D-Day who kept freedom alive for us all. You saved the world. You saved the world, and we must only defend it. Gentlemen, we salute you. May God bless the American and Allied troops who fought here. May God bless the United States of America. And may God bless all who cherish human freedom. Thank you.
Papa, what was it like on D-Day?
We had no idea what we were going to do or where it would happen, but it was the beginning.
It was a very decisive battle for us because our mission was to establish ourselves on the beach.
When we were on that boat, on that Hickens boat, everybody talked about the same thing, helping each other and not getting killed.
We started up this sandy area, and we're hundreds of men inside.
My father jumped about 1:30 in the morning on June 6th. The plane was too low, it was too fast, the fire coming up was so thick, it was like you could walk on it.
It wasn't something that we had ever seen before in all of our training.
I always have said that it was the power of my mother's prayers that saved me that day.
And it gets to me thinking about it. But as I look over those crosses, I see people standing up, even waving. I have to go back because there's something there that draws you back.
I have a very close friend that I knew by the name of Edward Mirosevic. He had received a very bad stomach wound, and I could not even bandage it properly. We said goodbye to each other wherever. He's laying here on the cemetery here in Colville. I think of the many men here that paid the ultimate price for the freedom of Europe.
Young people want to know and need to know. Everybody I saw that I was glad to fight alongside them, they were willing to stand up. And not all of them came back.
And they all have a story to tell. And it's our responsibility to tell those stories. People will not be forgotten as long as we keep talking about them.
I am not a hero. I just did my job. The real heroes are laying here on the cemeteries. These are our heroes, and we should never forget them.
Distinguished guests, the 46th President of the United States of America, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Invité d'honneur, le 46e Président des États-Unis d'Amérique, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
The hour had nearly come. Monday, June 5th, 1944. The evil of Hitler's Third Reich was devastating the world. Nazi Germany had subjugated the once free nations of Europe through brute force, lies, and twisted ideology of racial superiority. Millions of Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Millions of others killed by bombs, bullets, bloody warfare. Hitler and those with him thought democracies were weak, that the future belonged to dictators. Here, on the coast of Normandy, the battle between freedom and tyranny would be joined. Here, on that June morning, the testing was at hand. President Macron, Mrs. Macron, Secretary Austin, Secretary Blinken, distinguished guests, most of all, our honored veterans who met that test at the ages, a test of ages to that moment, 80 years ago today. On behalf of the American people and as Commander-in-Chief, it's the highest honor to be able to salute you here in Normandy once more. All of you, God love you. Winston Churchill called what happened here, quote, the greatest, most complicated operation ever, end of quote. After years of planning, Operation Overlord was ready to launch just as soon as the weather turned. Across the choppy English Channel, the Supreme Commander of the Allies, Dwight D. Eisenhower, waited. The largest force ever of its kind, built by 12 nations. Men, guns, planes, naval craft of every description waited. The world, captive and free, waited. Finally, Eisenhower's forecasters said there was a window in the weather. It would open briefly on Tuesday, the 6th of June. The general weighed the options and gave the order. At dawn, the Allies would strike. The great crusade to free Europe from tyranny would begin. That night, General Eisenhower drove to the English town of Newbury to visit paratroopers of the 101st Airborne. There were men from all over America. It was estimated that 80% of them would be killed within hours. That was the estimate. But they were brave, they were resolute, and they were ready. One soldier told General Eisenhower, quote, don't worry, sir. The 101st is on the job. Everything will be taken care of. That's what he said. And because of their courage and their resolve, because the courage and resolve of their allies, it was taken care of. From the sea and sky, nearly 160,000 Allied troops descended on Normandy. Many, to state the obvious, never came home. Many survived that longest day, kept on fighting for months until victory was finally won. And a few, a notable band of brothers, are here with us today. Kenneth Blaine Smith is here. On that day, under heavy artillery fire, he operated a rangefinder and radar on the first American ship to arrive at Normandy's coast, providing direct gunfire support for the Rangers scaling the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc on their daring mission to take out the German batteries. Bob Gibson is here. He landed on Utah Beach about 10 hours after the invasion began. Bullets flying everywhere, tracers lighting up the sky. Bob drove an M4 tractor with anti-aircraft gun mounted on top, providing critical protection for the infantry against the German Air Force. On that day, and for many days after, he continued. Ben Miller is here, a medic with the 82nd Airborne. At 3 a.m. on June 6th, he and 13 other medics flew over the channel in a rickety glider. Its wings were ripped off by giant poles that the Germans buried halfway in the ground to stop them from landing. They crashed, but they survived. And they did their duty, dragging injured soldiers to safety, treating wounds, saving lives while the battle raged. Every soldier who stormed the beach, who dropped by parachute or landed by glider, every sailor who manned the thousands of ships and landing craft, every aviator who destroyed German-controlled airfields, bridges, and railroads, all were backed by other brave Americans, including hundreds of thousands of people of color and women who courageously served despite unjust limitations on what they could do for their nation. Lewis Brown is here, part of the Red Ball Express, a truck convoy made up of mostly African-American drivers. They landed in Normandy in the wake of D-Day. They rushed supplies to the rapidly advancing front lines. Woody Woodhouse is here, members of the legendary Tuskegee Airmen, who flew over 15,000 sorties during the war. Marjorie Stone is here. She enlisted in the women's branch of the Naval Reserve, became an aircraft mechanic, spent the war keeping American planes and pilots in the air. Theirs has always been the story of America. Just walk the rows of this cemetery as I have. Nearly 10,000 heroes buried side by side, officers and enlisted, immigrants and native-born, different races, different faiths, but all Americans. All served with honor when America and the world needed them most. Millions back home did their part as well. From coast to coast, Americans found countless ways to pitch in. They understood our democracy is only as strong as all of us make it together. The men who fought here became heroes, not because they were the strongest or toughest or most fiercest, although they were, but because they were given an audacious mission, knowing, every one of them knew, the probability of dying was real. But they did it anyway. They knew, beyond any doubt, there are things that are worth fighting and dying for. Freedom is worth it. Democracy is worth it. America is worth it. The world is worth it. Then, now, and always. The war in Europe didn't end for another 11 months. But here, the tide turned in our favor. Here, we proved the forces of liberty are stronger than the forces of conquest. Here, we proved that the ideals of our democracy are stronger than any army or combination of armies in the entire world. We proved something else here as well, the unbreakable unity of the Allies. Here with us are men who served alongside the Americans that day, wearing different flags on their arms, but fighting with the same courage for the same purpose. What the Allies did together 80 years ago far surpassed anything we could have done on our own. It was a powerful illustration of how alliances, real alliances, make us stronger. A lesson that I pray we Americans never forget. Together we won the war. We rebuilt Europe, including our former enemies. It was an investment in what became shared and a prosperous future. We established NATO, the greatest military alliance in the history of the world. And over time, you got it, it is. And over time, we brought more nations into NATO, the NATO alliance, including the newest members, Finland and Sweden. Today, NATO stands at 32 countries strong, and NATO is more united than ever, and even more prepared to keep the peace, deter aggression, defend freedom all around the world. America has invested in our alliances and forged new ones, not simply out of altruism, but out of our own self-interest as well. America's unique ability to bring countries together is an undeniable source of our strength and our power. Isolationism was not the answer 80 years ago and is not the answer today. We know the dark forces that these heroes fought against 80 years ago. They never fade. Aggression and greed, the desire to dominate and control, to change borders by force, these are perennial. The struggle between a dictatorship and freedom is unending. Here in Europe, we see one stark example. Ukraine has been invaded by a tyrant bent on domination. Ukrainians are fighting with extraordinary courage, suffering great losses, but never backing down. They've been inflicted on the Russian aggressors. They've suffered tremendous losses, Russia. The numbers are staggering. 350,000 Russian troops dead or wounded. Nearly 1 million people have left Russia because they can no longer see a future in Russia. The United States and NATO and a coalition of more than 50 countries standing strong with Ukraine. We will not walk away. Because if we do, Ukraine will be subjugated, and it will not end there. Ukraine's neighbors will be threatened. All of Europe will be threatened. And make no mistake, the autocrats of the world are watching closely to see what happens in Ukraine, to see if we let this illegal aggression go unchecked. We cannot let that happen. To surrender to bullies, to bow down to dictators is simply unthinkable. Were we to do that, it means we'd be forgetting what happened here in these hallowed beaches. Make no mistake, we will not bow down. We will not forget. Let me end with this. History tells us freedom is not free. If you want to know the price of freedom, come here to Normandy. Come to Normandy and look. Go to the other cemeteries in Europe where our fallen heroes rest. Go back home to Arlington Cemetery. Tomorrow, I will pay respects at Pointe du Hoc. Go there as well and remember, the price of unchecked tyranny is the blood of the young and the brave. In their generation, in their hour of trial, the Allied forces of D-Day did their duty. Now the question for us is, in our hour of trial, will we do ours? We're living in a time when democracy is more at risk across the world than any point since the end of World War II, since these beaches were stormed in 1944. Now we have to ask ourselves, will we stand against tyranny, against evil, against crushing brutality of the iron fist? Will we stand for freedom? Will we defend democracy? Will we stand together? My answer is yes, and only can be yes. We're not far off from the time when the last living voices, those who fought and bled on D-Day, will no longer be with us. So we have a special obligation. We cannot let what happened here be lost in the silence of the years to come. We must remember it, must honor it, and live it. And we must remember the fact that they were heroes here that day does not absolve us from what we have to do today. Democracy is never guaranteed. Every generation must preserve it, defend it, and fight for it. That's the test of the ages. In memory of those who fought here, died here, literally saved the world here, let us be worthy of their sacrifice. Let us be the generation that when history is written about our time, in 10, 20, 30, 50, 80 years from now, it'll be said, when the moment came, we met the moment. We stood strong. Our alliances were made stronger. We saved democracy in our time as well. Thank you very much, and may God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, in honor of the veterans gathered with us today and those commemorated at this hallowed ground, Lieutenant Commander Catherine Miyamasu will now read the watch.
Chers invités, en l'honneur des vétérans réunis avec nous aujourd'hui et de ceux qui sont commémorés dans ce lieu sacré, la capitaine de corvette Catherine Miyamasu va maintenant lire The Watch, la garde.
Detail! Attention! Center! Face!
When a sailor retires, it is traditional that a younger service member read the watch. Today, we want to read the watch for all World War II veterans here today, both behind us and all around us. 80 years ago, these sailors stood the watch. While some of us were in our bunks at night, these soldiers stood the watch. While some of us were in school learning our trade, Marines, airmen, and coasties stood the watch. Yes, even before some of us were born into this world. The men behind me and their brothers and sisters who lay before me stood the watch. In those years, when the storm clouds of war were seen brewing on the horizon of history, they stood the watch. Many times, they would cast an eye ashore and see family standing there, needing guidance and help, needing that hand to hold in those hard times. But still, they stood the watch. They stood the watch 80 years ago. They stood the watch so that we, our families, and our fellow countrymen and women can sleep soundly in safety each and every night, knowing that these veterans stood the watch. Today, we are here to say, World War II veterans, the watch stands relieved. Relieved by those you have trained, guided, and led. American World War II veterans, you stand relieved. We have the watch.
Freeze! Oh!
Distinguished guests, please rise if you are able, as we salute those memorialized here at Normandy American Cemetery, and remain standing for the playing of La Sonnerie au Mort and taps, and the departure of the official party.
Chers invités, veuillez vous lever si vous le pouvez pour saluer ceux qui sont commémorés ici au cimetière américain de Normandie et rester debout pour l'interprétation de la sonnerie aux morts et de taps et pour le départ de la délégation officielle.
21-gun salute, followed by an F-35 flyover in the missing man formation. A powerful, poignant close to this ceremony. You've been watching our live coverage of the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion.
There is much more to come, though, on this hour of Morning News Now. Stay with us. We will be right back.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.